Welcome back to the shop, and I would like to thank you for tuning in. This is a 1901 to 1905 Lodge and Shippley lathe, which I have deemed the cheapest lathe on eBay that I just purchased for about $550 yesterday. Now, the reason I'm saying 1901 to 1905 is because I haven't found a real catalog of all the different models that came out around that era. And as far as I can tell, there is no data plate left on this thing. Most of the pieces and parts are pretty well worn. It was in a factory setting from about 1907 to 1964 is what I've heard from the previous owner. But it's in pretty good condition for everything concerned. I've barely worked on it, just wanted to go over all the features and set it up so I can kind of learn alongside you guys with this process. Obviously this is the first ever lathe I've owned and the first ever machinist tool that I've picked up and bought. So I just hope to have some experience for both you guys and me. So come along as we kind of run through all of its features and fix some problems, because right off the bat, that's supposed to spin and it's pretty stuck. So I'm going to be disassembling a few things and trying to find out what's really wrong. I know that the previous owner said that the motor was smoking whenever he started it up, and from an induction motor, that's not exactly a good thing. But we'll run through how to diagnose those things, and hopefully I can benefit just as much as you will. So thank you very much for tuning in, and welcome to the Rambling Ram YouTube channel. So as I've stated before, I've barely touched the thing, but just going through and looking at everything, I'm trying to determine whether or not the bearings in the actual motor are seized, or if the lathe brake, which I actually don't know where that's at currently, is stuck on. I know that there's no movement being returned from this lever, and as far as I can tell, that seems to be a pretty good option for a lathe brake of some type. But I know from these old induction motors, there's definitely a lot of possible problems. I've actually got a 12.5 horsepower one over there, and just with the way that they're constructed and how open-faced they are in this type of setting, it's pretty easy that it got some material stuck into it. But I think it's easy to tell this actually wasn't meant to have an electric motor on it. That came pretty well after the fact. Back in 1907, when this probably was placed into a factory setting, they still had the main drive steam engines, which using that main drive, it would power a bunch of different pulleys that were set up on axles in the roof of the building, and then from those would drop down actually onto the machine. And that might be why I haven't been able to really find one that's similar to this. It could have been all of its own construction or a kit that came out to convert it, once they had some pretty decent electric motors, such as this Wagner. But that's just it. It's so old that history is kind of being built around it, and it wasn't common to have anything that was electrically powered until about the 30s. So, for sure, if this is as old as I think it has been through the ringer and deserves to be treated better, which I'm hoping to do a full restoration, but we'll just have to see what my budget turns out to be. I might just need to get this thing operating and then use it, but I'm hoping I won't have to be that intolerant of everything, because I care about this thing. As weird as it sounds, I have a lot of connection to iron, which seems pretty justified from my position. Now that shroud actually wasn't factory with the piece. I heard from the previous owner, who, as I said before, is a metalsmith artist, that he made it. So I'm definitely going to try and salvage those pieces, because from what I could see of his artwork, because he took me on a tour of his place, he's a quality metalsmith, to say the least, and super kind person, and above all, just honed his craft to the point that it's amazing what he does. But regardless, here we are at the main drive. Now we can actually see there is movement, which is a great sign that most likely the motor is not froze up, which I was a bit afraid of, but I know that he said it was still smoking, so I'm probably going to still go through it anyway. But bearings are a lot harder to replace than just finding new pieces or just cleaning up contacts. So now that we know that's not the case, we then have the issue of what's causing the stiffness around here, which I believe I was correct in my assumption that this is a lathe brake. Most likely the drum variety or the clamp variety, let's see. Seems to be the cam variety, which is a rotating piece of metal. It's got an axle through the center and has a cam lobe, which camshafts are pretty much just an inclined plane. That's what a simple machine. As it rotates, if the lobe is on this side, it's pushing out. So when it rotates to this side, it pulls off the brake. It's a big U-shaped horseshoe pretty much that on one side it's bolted, and on the other side, as you push out, it bends that metal just a slight bit to give it clearance to spin. So this lever, you have the actual safety control, which you push in on there, it pulls out this pin, and then you're able to move the cam lobe. But since it's not moving right now, I'm going to have to find a way to either get some type of penetrating oil or use a little bit of force to soften up those joints. Now, a tool I would highly recommend for people that are working on machines, especially ones with O-rings, is a dental pick. Now, it seems crazy, but I've had a lot of instances where I can't get a small flat blade screwdriver or anything else into a tight crevice, or I need something small and pointy that is of a little bit higher hardness than anything else to dig out a certain space. And in this case, there's actually been a wad of dirt build up in the oiling holes right there, restricting the flow of oil onto the cam and making it so that this most likely is just a little bit under lubricated. So using oil can that I've actually restored, never recorded it because didn't think YouTube was a thing back then. I'm just gonna squirt a little oil and see if I can't have that shake through. Regardless though, would highly recommend a dental pick like this. They're pretty cheap. I think I got this one for a couple dollars inside of a pack. So if you're working with O-rings or hydraulics or anything like that, would highly recommend a dental pick. So here comes the big reveal, going from a seized up thing. Now that I've actually moved this selector and been able to get it into the right position, seems like everything wants to spin. That is the brake on. And that is the brake off. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of dirt dauber nests in here. But so far, seeming like it's becoming even more promising that this thing will work. Here's another add-on piece. But right here is the actual selector cam that tightens and loosens this belt. It's not your standard rubber. It's actually more of a cloth embedded leather, if I can tell right. That are just four layers of cloth. But cam lobes, again, you've got your upper and lower. You can drop it, meaning that now you've got a lot of slack on your belt, and feasibly you could move it from one loop, one rung to another, and therefore making the reduction lessen, because actually, if you can see up here, our top drive, and it's decreasing in size. This, when paired up to this, will make the lathe rotate the fastest, and this paired up to this will make the lathe rotate the slowest. When you're working on larger pieces, you can only cover so many feet per minute, so slowing down the chuck head for something that's about the same size as the chuck would be beneficial, because then you're still rotating and moving as much material as if you were having this at double the speed and something half the size of the chuck. We do have, in fact, a rotating assembly, and it might be time to see if the motor turns over. Now I'm going to see if I can't get some electrons moving, and this right here is the main breaker. pretty great noise. So that's off, that's on. You can hear the very mechanical contacts clicking away in there. And then you actually have this knob over here, which is your reverser, which I'm amazed that they even had something like this back in the day. As far as I can tell, it's doing the exact process of reversing a single phase. You're just reversing polarities for the most part, which sounds really easy, but in fact is not very fun from what I've gathered in my class learning. But regardless, we've got a failsafe. I'll keep the breaker off and the reverser off and see if this Wagner motor, old induction-y thing, kicks to life. Trip that. There's voltage going through that. Now, previous owner said that he had to move the belt in some way. I'm very scared to do that, but I'll put on a glove and attempt. Never mind. Well, if you can't tell, this is the first time I've seen it run. So now I get to check and see whether or not the reverser switch works. And seems to work perfectly. So next step would be to tighten up the cam on the load and make it to where this thing might actually have a chance in hell of spinning some metal today. So I've just gone through and lubed everything. There's actually oil caps on the motor, which makes me wonder if that wasn't one of the reasons that it was smoking. It was building up heat in the induction coil and burning off some of the extra oil that was in it, because I've never seen a motor that actually has oil fill caps. Gone through and actually greased these pilots, which these definitely are not original. I mean, that's a grease zert and a grease pilot bearing, probably in recent, couple of last decades. And I've taken off both of the oil fill bowls. There's one here and one at the other end to fill the main bearings that are bronze, is what I've heard, from actually up top. But I have squirted a good amount of oil. I'll just go to show that on camera. I figured out a little bit of what makes it tick, and I've swapped down and made the gearing much further reduced. So hopefully, now that we have a little bit of extra gearing reduction and tightened, everything spins. And reverses. The problem is, I think you can pick it up on the camera, there's a lot of grinding from the gearbox from what I can hear, and I was told before that there is something up with these bearings, that either the lashing's out or I might need to get new bronze bearings. But for the time being, I'm going to make a tool to fit inside of this chuck and see if I can't have a piece of cold roll that my grandfather still kept around to place in here and check out the tooling parameters, because obviously your cutting bits are right over here. I focused on this because it's got to be the coolest thing I've ever experienced to work on something that is older than anybody I've ever met, and even anybody older than they've probably ever met. I mean, my grandfather's father, I think, was born around the same time this thing was made. So it's amazing to see that it's still kicking, and hopefully it'll outlive me. So I've got this little piece of round bar. I have no idea what the carbon content or what the steel variety, or even if it is steel, but I'm just setting up my tool. I'm going to be making a quick change toolbar in the future once I get this thing a little bit more centered. but for now I'm just going to use what's stock. My plan probably is to actually use this base, but just use the base, maybe use the slide, but remove this actual tool holder just because it's archaic and I don't know if I can find many bits. I've already bought a few bits off of an eBay auction. Around the same time I actually bought this thing, which, stroke of luck that I could get it, but definitely would like to change it over to a quick change tool post as opposed to what it's got now, which is a little bit archaic. Regardless, right now, just gonna try and get it to where I could face, because I can't move this post actually any further back. You've got the adjustment wheel off the side here. I can move it forward, move it backwards, but it binds up just about right there. So I'm going to grab my dial indicator, and for those of you that don't know, this is vital. So that looks about perfect to me. So moving the tool out of the way, and making sure there's nothing in the way of the actual assembly. Let's see. Yep. You can go back here and turn and see how much run out it has. As you can see, that's moving very slightly, and every mark is a thousandth of an inch. So start at it, let's say it's 29, going up, going back down. Not very straight. However, there is a chance, you know, obviously I could have this mounted improperly. And it's very loose, because that is not supposed to move that greatly. But I'm hoping to make an actual tool in the future. Obviously, that is how a dial indicator works. Let me just stop tapping it. That's just good enough to me. Obviously, not perfect, but let's say we move this up and out of here. Right there, you're at about 61.5 thou, and as it rotates, and you skip 60, still about 60. A lot of imperfections on the very edge there where it's been scuffed. But I'm honestly very surprised with how straight it seems. There's not a ton of run out. Not nearly as much as I expected there to be in a machine that's this old. I obviously probably need to move it in a little bit to get a really good read. That's 60. Still about 60, getting up there a little bit. And 60, so I would guess there's maybe a couple, maybe four thou run out around the whole diameter of the thing. But all in all, extremely good for a machine that I paid only $550 for, and probably has more stories than I could ever tell in my life. I'm just going to tighten this down. I'm not really going to worry about how much run out it has. Just using something of similar fit and rotating. Make sure I'm not putting too much pressure on each place. I just want to get it tight. I'm not worried about placement, as I'm just going to try and face this to see if I can even do anything. That's a good bit tighter. So facing pretty much is the process. of using your tool to cut along the face of a material to make it even with the rest of what you're working with. I've got two axes here. I've got X, which moves it in and out, and I've got Y, which moves it away from the piece and towards the piece. For the most part, the goal is, now there is a little bit of play, I think you can see that with the knob right there. I could take that out if I tighten down this nut right here. But the goal is to take off maybe a couple mil and push into the piece along that center. And this more than likely is a very dull bit. Always wear safety glasses when working around materials like this. You ever get a electromagnetic scan or you're around something like that and you have a bunch of material in you, that'll get sucked out. So, XY. Maybe go in for another pass. It's a little bit deeper. Grab a little bit of oil. And I'm just trying to work with the tool. Not seeing anything burning from the motor. And so far it doesn't look like the jaws are being forced open at all. So instead of moving Y, just moving X. That's why these pieces, or these cutting bits, are shaped the way they are. They're actually made to go in multiple formations, and you can get a flatter cut. Using the greatest piece of modern marvels, I will say a sock is by far the best shop rag you can have. Cover your hands with it, do everything with it. And plus, you're wasting nothing. It's a sock. I wore these for like 3 years, and now I'm using them as shop rags. So, nothing to be disillusioned by. We're definitely running on a budget here. Getting that tool face lined up to where it's not completely cutting flat. That might put a little bit too much strain on the tool for my liking, especially one from an old toolbar like this. But getting it to where it's just touching with the tip and hopefully able to chip further as you roll back. We can hopefully make a little bit more swarth. That's what I've heard it referred to as. Most likely that's wrong. But cutting edge engineering has not failed me. So, once again, machine's working great still, not having any issues, but going in for a little bit of a different pass. trying to get a little bit of a cleaner cut. This thing does wonders. I'm definitely gonna have to clean up all of the grease and everything like that. In an effort to show off this machine a little bit more, I've actually come back another day to show really more about the live feed with the screw function. I don't think I did it justice the last time that I covered it. But this indicator panel right over here is actually telling you the threads per inch, the speed needed to be set, as well as A or B, which would be this control plunger right here. Now, this transmission is just related to the actual live feed screw. So if we turn on the machine here, one is going to be your slowest and 11 is going to be your fastest speed on this. So with a little bit of movement right there, that's B, which is the faster setting, and that's A, which is the slower setting. And then we've got our three functions right here. This actually is your control lever, so setting that in, pulls it in. You can hear the grinding from that gearbox. It's just because of the bushing that's actually in the main lever there. And then you actually have your reverser and forward. So that's going to be pulling it backwards very slowly towards the chuck. And this is pushing away from the chuck. And if we up our speed a little bit here, you can see that a lot better. And simply taking that away, now selecting it through. Putting the machine in neutral is pulling all the way back on the plunger, or there's a little small space right about on this cast line for this front panel, or you can simply just take the whole machine out of gear, which also works, but I'd probably not recommend that. Then, if I'm not mistaken, now that's direct, so it might be a little bit quieter. Yeah, so that's not going through any transmission, that's just directly going to the machine. But I'm actually going to record a video of me taking the keyways out of this, take the whole trolley apart, because as you can see, it's pretty well, after I lubed it up, all rust. So I'm going to try and clean it and actually get it to the point where I can get the trolley and then a lot of other things off of this actually main carriageway, so that way I can clean it and give it some more justice. And I've got my painted parts actually sitting out and drying currently, so that way I can get a shield that at least puts a little bit more character with this whole thing. Because I'm going to try and find a base coat. This is kind of a greenish gray from what I can see that matches, but regardless, I'm going to try and get this thing moved to the spot over in that direction where I want it sitting, hopefully in the next few days or so. And that way I can actually pull in the next project, which is going to be a 1940s horizontal bandsaw from Kalamazoo that my grandfather bought. So this is your actual retaining bolt that holds in your main key, or I guess you could call it a way. As you can see, I've cleaned a little bit on this. I previously removed it, but just a lot of buildup of grime. The thing is, the slop in this thing can be pretty well controlled just by taking this screw and driving it in there a little bit further. I think there's a back here on the other side that forces it into the actual keyway a little bit better. Dovetail design, so there's no keyway on the opposite side, but there's a keyway on this side that can be adjusted. And this is actually a tool that I made for the chuck jaws. Fits in there pretty nice. It's hand ground, so that's why it kind of looks a little janky. And look at the main block, which I don't believe is that worn. Yeah, this is much better than the other X-axis. Still a little sloppy, but far better. Getting a wrench large enough to remove these top two bolts, or nuts I should say, so I can move this whole rear mount out. This is one of the best tools I bought in auction. Or there. Any expensive crap to go with what works and what's not that hard. And the other side. Now those two, take it down. Might need some extra force, but I should be able to take off the lower retainer. Which smells like it's going to drop on the ground as soon as I take this off. Yep. There's one. There's the other. Set these over here. And here we have the actual retainer that holds this on. There we go. And now we can move this whole thing, but this pretty much just presses up on the bottom of this keyway and holds some friction on there. So that way you don't have to worry about anything slipping around while you've got this thing extended out. And I've actually gotten this to move a lot easier than before, but this is your retaining lever. You can barely see it, but pushing that in locks in your holder, and that is just slop inside of the actual nut. But regardless, seems to be fully functioning and movable now. So I'll take this off and probably see about either oiling it up or just cleaning. So here we have another piece, the lower portion of the keyway. As you can see, this is detachable, and that's actually your running metal. It's much better than I expected. It's not, the main thing that you look for is you try to assure that there are no major scratches running along the surface of here. And as far as I can tell, there's no marks that I could pick up by hand. And as much as people really can't trust it, I understand that the fact that the human skin is pretty capable. I'm not sure the exact number of microns that the human finger can detect, but I know it's pretty up there, and I'm not feeling any surface wear or anything like that that could be an issue. There's a little bit of a ridge from where it wasn't contacting, but that's fine. So you can definitely tell why all of that oil was turning dark. You can see all the little rust spots and surface rust points, especially getting out further where it was used less. But I don't know if the camera can catch it. You can see a little bit of it, but right there, that's actually hatching from factory, I'm pretty sure, where they engraved a little bit of a groove pattern to make it to where it caught oil a little bit better. But all in all, this thing, the more I rush into it, the more it seems like it was really kept up, which is great for me. Well, here it is in its final resting spot, I'd say. I think this is exactly where I'm going to keep it for now. And as you can see, a little bit of work has been done to it. I've painted all that. Now I'm using Rust-Oleum house paint pretty much to paint all these shields. It's pretty thick coat, so I don't really suppose anything's going to get through it. Spray painted an R onto there with my grandfather's old style set, and took the liberty of getting a shield for this, robbed it off of an old trouble light, and painted that up. So now got some pretty good light and directional, so that way I don't have to worry about it being blaring into my eyes. And made a chuck tool, which I'm not going to zoom in on that because you probably can see from here my welds are awful. But it's come a long way. I finally am getting closer and closer. I'm just about to start setting up to make a new handle for this wheel right here. And really after that, the next video covering this thing is going to be a paint job. There's not much else that I can do other than make a chuck for the tailstock and maybe a couple other little bits and pieces, but I think you can tell these oil cups, I've redone the seals in them and polished them on the other side too, and they work like a charm. So really, I hope to cover this thing a little bit more in the future, but for right now it's going to be a tool, which I think it was designed to and probably wants to be. I don't know of a time that it's actually gone back to a machining process where it's actually working with equipment and supplies and everything like that. But I'm going to put her to good use and try and take care of her, because pretty sentimental now, especially now that it's got a bit of a branding on it. I thank you guys for tuning in for the first episode, and hopefully this is going to be a long series. I've got the Kalamazoo just sitting outside. I just recently got this spot cleaned up. Probably hauled off about 1,000 pounds or a little bit more worth of scrap iron that was sitting on a shelf right behind me. But tore down that shelf, got everything moved around, and now hopefully I can get some pieces of wood and actually balance this thing out, since the carriage is a little bit wobbly. It's really not really noticeable until you actually turn it on and there's a little bit of vibration. I'm happy with how far it's come along, and definitely see in the future a lot more uses for this than I ever could have imagined. I'm really doing this at this point to pay homage to my grandfather's memory. He's the one that built this place, and the mile 44 sign behind me is something that he got. Jack of all trades, and was gone too soon. He died at 54 back in 2001, which I wasn't even an inkling of a memory or an idea inside of anybody's mind. But after he passed, this whole place, the whole shop has been built up with junk. So in the video, I think you can probably spot a few piles of mess that I've got sitting around. But that's been my task. Nobody else has wanted to take it on, so I'm turning this place back into a workshop. As homage, but also for the fact that I see the biggest point, since I kind of want to be a teacher in some forms in the future, but also because I've been in the curriculum system, the best way to acknowledge that a teacher has helped you is to use their teachings and get better than them. So that's what I want to do. My grandfather left me a lot of information and gave me everything that I have. You know, as odd as it sounds, I never met the man, but I feel very close to him. So just to even add something like this that I think he probably wanted at some point, and bring it home and get it set up in a spot that I think he'd be proud of. It's odd to feel a connection to somebody that you've never met, but I suppose my grandfather's definitely one of those people. But thank you so much, guys, for coming along with me. It means a ton. If you stuck around to the end of this video, I'm very impressed, because I don't even think I would sit around for a video that's this long. But I've got more coming in the future. And like I said before in the video, I think it's titled New Beginnings, right below this one if you're on my homepage. That's just it. It's all to educate the masses. And hopefully my little coverage with the history and everything of this thing has been beneficial, and seeing it in its final way right now maybe inspired somebody to say, that piece of scrap iron that I got outside doesn't seem too bad after all. But nevertheless, I appreciate all of you. And if you are even hearing me right now, then you're probably part of the very few percentile that cares enough to stick to the end. So it's a thank you to you, because I can't make anything happen unless I have people that want to see it. And I don't think I've ever had that in my life. So if you need anything or want to see something specific or have an idea about a video or a project that you think I could maybe tackle, leave it down below in the comments section or shoot me an email. I'll put my business email down in the description just because it's a throwaway. I don't mind. But that's just it. The Rambling Ram YouTube channel is officially conducted into a new segment, and I can't thank you guys enough. So for all the support, for all the laugh, for all the likes, hopefully, and all the views in the future, I'm very appreciative, and thank you guys for watching. Take care of yourselves.